Colleagues, thank you for joining us here today on the opening morning, the opening day of the 2023 UN Water Conference. I'd like to begin by congratulating the governments of the Netherlands and Tajikistan for their leadership. And as we know, water has such an impact on livelihoods of millions of people. And it goes beyond what many of us perhaps think of on a daily basis, because it goes beyond our personal usage. It goes into food and energy security, health, the environment, essentially almost all of the SDGs. So as we focus today a bit on SDG 6, clean water and sanitation for everyone, and how all of our countries in the world are aiming to achieve this in just a short 7 years, how do we come together and accelerate global efforts? And today, I'm really delighted as head of the Joint SDG Fund to introduce a panel of experts on water management, sustainable development, and sanitation. And I'd like to introduce them now, and then we'll kick off. First and foremost, welcome to Ambassador Renee van Hel, Director of Inclusive Green Growth and Ambassador for Sustainable Development at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Joseph Schurer, who is our United Nations resident coordinator based in Cambodia. Ms. Dina Pons, who is Managing Director at Convene Investment Management, also based in Cambodia. Mr. Winston Shaw from the Rural Agricultural Authority of Jamaica, where he is Senior Director for Technology, Training, and Tech Information. And last but not least, Juliana Lindsay, the UNICEF representative in Kigali, Rwanda. So colleagues, warm welcome. Thank you again for making the time and for joining us. My name is Lisa Kerbiel. I'm head of the Joint SDG Fund Secretariat. And today we aim to frame the conversation around the role of pooled financing, such as the UN Joint SDG Fund, in strengthening resilience to water scarcity and water access. And we do that in a myriad of ways. And today we're going to focus on promoting data analysis, financing strategies, and innovative financing mechanism. And we're really building on the results of successful joint programs of the United Nations in Jamaica, Cambodia, and Rwanda, and on leadership of the Netherlands in promoting the Water Action Agenda. And it's our goal today to discuss opportunities to accelerate investments in this sector and ultimately help close the gap to achieve SDG 6 around the world. We have just over an hour and 10 minutes, so I don't want to take up more time. We have so much expertise in this small but powerful panel. So if you don't mind, we'll open the floor for questions after the panelists all speak. And Ambassador van Hel, I'll start with you. Ambassador, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, together with Tajikistan, has organized this year's water conference, and it's the first to be organized in nearly 50 years. Many of us know that the history of the Netherlands is inextricably linked to water. And the Netherlands has a wealth of knowledge and experience in water management. And I know you feel a strong responsibility for this issue at the international as well as at the national level. The Netherlands is also a key partner of the Joint SDG Fund, having invested over $33 million US, with more coming, we understand, since our inception in 2019. So Ambassador, we would love for you to give us an overview of the efforts of the Netherlands, both at national and international levels, towards SDG 6. Over to you.
So much. Thank you so much for giving me this floor. First and foremost, of course, it's great that after so many years, there's finally again a water conference, a UN water conference. And of course, it is a great platform to put what we all share around this table is the importance that we attach to WASH and finding solutions for that and actually making progress on that. And I think we all share this frustration that we're not making progress and that we're actually falling behind. So why is the Netherlands co-hosting this UN Water Conference? Because we also feel that by making the problem bigger, we might actually find solutions for the very things that we would like to achieve within WASH. Because if we look at how we're dealing with water, of course, first and foremost, we're interested in making sure that people have WASH facilities. But in addition to that, we were always interested in water management. But that, of course, is compounded and influenced by the fact that there's climate change and biodiversity challenges. And on top of that, one of the things that we feel is neglected It's also the productive use of fresh water. And 90% of fresh water is used by industry, by agriculture, by energy generation, by urbanization. And if you take that whole picture together, we see that that it's incredibly badly managed. And that is also a warning of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. The Global Commission on the Economics of Water is a renowned group of people with Matsukato, the DG of the WTO, John Rockstrom, and the Vice Prime Minister of Singapore, and they'll present their findings. And what you will see is that they really call for this attention, and they want to make the world alert that we basically have created a water crisis, and we have done so by substantially influencing the hydrological cycle in a negative manner. And even if there was no climate change, it would already be bad. But the effects of our bad managing of fresh water is compounded by climate change, and also interacts in a nasty way with biodiversity and amongst themselves. So that is basically sort of the broad picture that we want to sketch with this UN Water Conference, and then also a call for action. Because what we see with this overconsumption of this with the wasting of fresh water is that, of course, it has also something to do with, and I'm reluctant to say it in this context because I know that we always have loaded political discussions on pricing of water, but that is for human consumption. But if we just focus on the fact that 90% of fresh water consumption is not human consumption, but is productive consumption, and there is where a lot of things go wrong, because it's not factored into the decision making. People take water for granted, and that is wrong. And I also feel that we really have to make sure that water as a subject, as a relatively scarce resource, as something that needs to be managed more urgently because of climate change and biodiversity loss, is that it should also get a much higher political priority. There's no Minister of Finance in the world who does not think sometimes about energy, because it's relatively scarce. But there's very few ministers of finance who are interested in water. They're not necessarily super interested in wash, which is a fundamental mistake. But also increasingly important is that they're also not interested in having the availability of water in not only in a sustainable, but also in a durable manner. So one of the things that we also want to achieve with this water conference is that just as much as that every smart Minister for Development or head of state or Minister of Finance puts climate change into the heart of their national economic policies, they should also put water into the heart of their national economic policies, because climate change has two nice molecules. There's the molecule of CO2, and that's all about mitigation, but there's also the molecule of H2O, and that one is undervalued. We also see it in the availability of finance. If you look at the climate finance that is available, most of it goes to mitigation, a little chunk goes to adaptation. If you look at actually what countries find important, in 90% of the cases in their nationally determined contribution, and so how to deal and implement Paris, water is an issue. And at the same time, there's not enough finance flowing towards water. So the solution will be that no matter where it's wash or whether it's water in relation to productive uses, we should really make sure that we get the politics and economics right, because they're not right at the moment. And one way of doing that is, I think, is also valuing water much more. Of course, in the context of wash, it's very clear what we want, because it has to do with human dignity. And if you don't get that right, you don't have any development in your country. But also, and I'm sure that people, I mean, also if we look at the countries that we're discussing, they also have challenges with just the availability, the durable availability for their economic progress. And when those things start competing with each other, it will really get messy, and it will definitely not help any of us to deal with the SDGs. The Netherlands was always fighting abundance of water in Europe. But what we now see is that both the countries, islands in the Caribbean and the Netherlands, we're dealing with rising sea levels, and we're also dealing with freak weather events. And in the Netherlands, we also have temporarily drought. that has a myriad of impacts, but it also has an impact on the availability of our drinking water, because we get a lot of that from the rivers. So our message is, the world is in a water crisis, and if we want to solve it, we have to look at all the different aspects: wash, the productive use, the interaction of water with climate change and biodiversity loss. And we need to put it on the table on the highest level of our governments, and also get it into the boardrooms. Mm-hmm. And while we're seeking for more finance, we feel that by making water a more relatively scarce resource, for example, in a nexus approach, we can really make a change. Why do we think we can be successful now? It is because there's an incredible understanding that things are going wrong. I mean, we've been in Sharm el-Sheikh, we've been in Montreal with the convene process, and there's an incredible call for more money. But we also see that money is not getting there. Mm-hmm. And even if we would hiccup all the public money that we're promising to spend, then we still need an awful lot of private money, and that's what unites us here around the table. So. Mm-hmm. Way too many words for 8 o'clock in the morning. My apologies, but I hand the mic over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think your data point around 90% going into productive use across so many sectors, agriculture, energy, large industrial complexes, I think is a notable one, because there's so much, if you will, chatter and conversation around the multinationals, around ESG, around the SDGs. And I wonder if this is time to put the big W, that molecule, that ever important molecule, into the center of those conversations. I think that's, it's really interesting how we can somehow overlook what can be so basic and essential. And I think this conference is going to make sure that changes. Another question maybe for you, Ambassador, is how can the international community, how can the United Nations, support this effort? And in particular, given the Netherlands' strong support to the Joint SDG Fund, what role do you think a fund like this can play in this important dilemma?
Well, it's clear that the Joint SDG Fund is really a catalyst. And also, while it's focusing on all the different SDGs, it plays a super important role. And you would wish that when all the executive directors who are united in UN Water would come together, that they would have also such a catalyst approach to an important water agenda. And so one of the things that we also think is that it's about energizing ourselves as member states, but it's also about energizing the UN organization, the MDBs. And I think that's what we're doing. And energizing also means that you have good examples where a comprehensive approach, which we try to achieve in the Joint SDG Fund, works. So energizing everyone, and also an urgent call for action. And what I also would like to underline is that a lot of the things that we're discussing are not necessarily only a matter of throwing more money against it. It's also structurally reforming our societies, and also to a certain degree, perhaps also structurally reforming how we do certain things within the UN and in the MDBs.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. We know that there's a lot of conversation about the reform of the development banking sector at the spring meetings coming up in DC, right? So I think this is an important time. The Water Conference can actually perhaps seed some of those conversations. So thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you with questions from the audience as we loop back. But let me transition now from that global perspective now into one more specifically in Cambodia. And I'm delighted to welcome again Joseph Scher, who is the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Cambodia. Joe, good afternoon. Thank you again for being here. Joe, we know that according to data from the Asian Development Bank, only about 28% of Cambodians are currently using safely managed drinking water. And to provide access to clean, safe drinking water and sanitation, USAID estimates that Cambodia needs an additional $191 million annually. And to help address this challenge, the United Nations in Cambodia, under your leadership, has developed the CLEAN Initiative, a plan and an innovative blended financing mechanism to help all finance access to drinking water. So could you tell us a little bit about the design of the Clean Initiative and how you arrived at this blended financing mechanism?
Thank you, Lisa. And first of all, pleasure to be with you all today and on the panel. Evening time in Southeast Asia right now, but not too late, so I should still be reasonably coherent, I hope. And indeed, in terms of the challenges you outlined for Cambodia, you're absolutely right. And we actually expect UNICEF and WHO to come up officially with new data just in a few weeks from now. That show that indeed we're still stagnating at around 29% of access to safely managed water services in Cambodia. And the proportion of population with access to safely managed sanitation is only 36%. So we have a long way to go. And there's a number of reasons why these numbers are where they are. Without going into all of them, one is, and as the ambassador already highlighted before me, is of course the priority among many other priorities, the access to public funds or simply investment in the sector. We do know, if we look at the SDGs globally, that we simply cannot realize them only through the public sector, which is why the UN, among many other partners, is looking increasingly and partnering much more innovatively and much more deliberately with the private sector in those sectors where we can have a joint initiative that gets us closer to those SDG targets. And credit where credit is due. I've been in Cambodia now a little bit more than 4 months, so this was not developed under my leadership, but hopefully I can bring the initiative over the line. And the teams in Cambodia have designed the Clean Joint Program, which looks at both water and waste management as areas to invest in, also looking at the intersection in terms of where sanitation issues and waste issues might interfere with the access to clean water services. We've come up with a blended instrument that brings together a couple of UN agencies that will look at technical support, policy de-risking, financial de-risking, and pre and post investment services in terms of finding the right initiatives that can be invested in. Of course, looking at always as the UN and with our local partners at bringing these services ideally to the most underserviced communities, keeping in mind the issue of leaving no one behind. And we have to find the right balance here in terms of what is investable and where we can actually create the condition to increase and go deeper into those areas that are underserved. But of course, that's very much part of the idea behind this. Then it is about mobilizing, hopefully, resources from the SDG fund. Ambassador, you talked catalytic funding. So the SDG fund is talking about that. And we hope to get an investment to a fund manager initially of about $6 million. And that would then also mobilize an initial amount of about 1 to 3. So looking at $17, $18 million of additional investment money. This might, for those that are really big in this space, sound a bit small. But we believe that it would be one of the first such initiatives in Cambodia, not the first, but it's a big area to invest in. And if we succeed, then we should be able, looking at the context of Cambodia today, to actually attract significant additional resources into this sector so that these numbers that have been stagnating can grow pretty rapidly. So in short, the Clean Joint Program is specifically looking at this nexus between the private sector, sustainable and affordable water services, and investment opportunities. If all goes well, we hope to be in business early next year. Let me stop there because I know there's many other panelists coming, but if there's a follow-up question, happy to dig deeper. Thank you.
Fantastic, Joe. No, I think it's, I mean, this area of blended finance is really making so many leapfrog movements since COVID. At least that's what we're seeing on our side. There's just been, it seems, a mushrooming of attention to how this can work. And I think really applying the lens of blended finance to these WASH challenges in Cambodia with the data that you've given us is really exciting. And you know, I think going straight to Dina to really speak to a critical stakeholder in making this work is probably the logical next step. So Joe, I know we'll come back to you, with questions, but thank you so much. So colleagues, really kind of just pivoting right over to Ms. Dina Pons, who is the managing partner at Incofin Investment Management. Incofin is a leading impact investor with more than 15 years of track record in delivering financial and social returns to asset owners. So the real deal, right? How do we not only give access to water and sanitation in Cambodia, but also make sure that investors are getting a return on their money? And over the years, Incofin has managed more than 10 funds, invested in over 200 institutions in over 50 countries through debt and equity financing, and now has more than US 1 billion assets under management. Dina, it's so wonderful to see you since we met at the OECD event just a few months ago. We're thrilled to see you, and we're thrilled to hear a little bit more about the work that you're leading on the ground in Cambodia. Incofin is obviously a global fund. You're managing investments in emerging markets around the world. But one of these funds particularly is the Water Access Acceleration Fund. And that's specifically to provide equity and quasi-equity investments in the water value chain. So we'd love to hear about the Water Access Acceleration Fund, and in particular about the rationale behind the fund's global approach. Over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for the opportunity to share indeed our journey. As you said, Incofin is a global impact investor. So we've been operating for, in fact, a little bit more than 20 years now. And we're excited to announce that 2 weeks ago, actually, we launched the first equity fund focused on access to drinking water with an impact mandate. So that's an exciting milestone.
Indeed.
That has been a very bumpy road, but an exciting road as well. And I think, I was very touched by the invitation today, because I think this fund pretty much embodies what we are all recognizing is the need for the sector. And it's the fact that the water sector should not remain a public funding conversation. The water sector should now be paused to the conversation between public, private actor, and together only, respecting our different mandates, recognizing the need for complementarity, together only we can achieve and we can push the acceleration of drinking water access or WASH, depending on the mandate that we have. And I think that's very much what this Water Access Acceleration Fund is about. I'll tell you just a few features. The Water Access Acceleration Fund, first and foremost, is a fund. It's an impact investment solution. When I pitch it, when I explain it, I know that sometimes it is not a clear concept, because again, in the water space, it's been a lot of programmatic public funding conversation, grant funding conversation, subsidized debt conversations. And so I'm happy to say that, in fact, the Water Access Acceleration Fund is all that at the same time, because it's a blended finance solution. And the reason why we managed, after 2 years of fundraising, to reach a total size of 36 million euro, and the reason why we have the ambition and the confidence that we can reach 70 million euro is because we, in the structure of the fund, blended all these different stakeholders, blended the public funding providers who said, this is my mandate, and for me, I have a water agenda. Another one would come and say, this is my mandate, water is part of it, but I have a stronger climate agenda. Another one would come and say, I'm a private sector solution, I cannot afford to take too much risk. This money is coming from European savers or pension funders who put the saving of their life in an account. They want to do something sustainable for the world, but they cannot lose their money. It's okay. We have different class share in the structure of the fund. So I think, the Water Access Acceleration Fund is one type of blended finance structure, but I really think it's worth kind of looking at its features and recognizing that likely it's a very interesting way to pull together at the same table financiers who would have never been able otherwise to work together. And the truth is, indeed, out of the 36 million euro I'm talking about, I have a corporation, I have a foundation, I have development financial institutions, I have a bank, I have a grant provider.
Right.
And all these people are actually okay with different risk appetite and different return expectation, but the same ambition and impact focus to push for drinking water access to low-income population to be accelerated. They are all here confident that through our blended finance structure, we can make this work for them. So I think that's the one thing I'll comment on. And the second one, Lisa, regarding the global approach, I would say, so I said it's the first global equity fund in drinking water to low-income population. So when you do something as pioneer for the first time, if people have not done it before you, it's likely because you're doing something, yes, pioneer, but risky, right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, people would have done it.
Right.
So for us, the way, and again, this is coming from 20 years of global impact investment experience, we're saying if we think that the drinking water space is not just recently investment ready, we need also to hedge our bet. We need to diversify our risk, and therefore global strategy is what's needed, because if I take a risk on an institution in Nicaragua, maybe I can balance my portfolio with an institution a little bit bigger and stronger in India, for instance. And by the essence of having a global platform such as the Incofin one, we are able to task our teams in the ground to help us originate and find these companies that will ultimately help us build a global portfolio.
Right. It's fascinating to imagine the pieces and the complexity of what you've been really building over these years for this fund, and the first of its kind. So congratulations. What a wonderful announcement to share with everyone with us this morning. Dina, you know, a big piece of what the UN tries to do is really make that enabling environment of national policies a piece of this puzzle to support investors exactly like you and others. Are there any aspects that you've seen over the years? You have so much experience in this area that you feel will be critical to take blended finance even further in emerging markets?
Yes, you know, but again, the essence of blended finance is the fact that you're going to bring to the table people who are coming from very, very different worlds. So for me, just lowering the pressure and telling people that it's okay to don't know, stop the jargon, let's speak openly. There's certain finance terms that, you know, people who come from development background do not know, and we should not feel that this is something that they should know. They have another expertise. And meanwhile, it is very important for the hardcore financier people to try to make an effort and understand what's the development reality we're talking about. So for me, first and foremost, is having people who manage to, you know, have been exposed to both or many of these worlds, bring people together and try to unpack the confusion and misunderstanding. I'll tell you, for instance, that, you know, I had a lot of foundations who could not understand when I was telling them, you can invest in this blended finance structure through grant funding, and you will be part of an asset class that is called first loss, that is more risky, that it takes the hit in case everything goes wrong. And by doing this, if you put 1 million in my fund that ultimately wants to reach 70 million, you get catalytic effects of your 1 million. It's so much higher than if you do a 1 million direct funding of a product. That conversation takes time, because once you have one person who understands it, feel confident, then there are so many other stakeholders that they need to go talk to. So I think we need to, you know, really respect our respective expertise and go out there thinking that, you know, the mainstream finance guys are not the one that should shape the structure and templates on how to structure innovative finance vehicles. And meanwhile, we are here to hopefully be heard from the development finance players and providers when we tell them what's the reality on the ground. You know, for me, one key lessons I learned from this journey of being the impact asset manager in the middle is that I had to spend 2 years of my life fundraising while keeping my investment strategy live and relevant, and meeting entrepreneurs and testing whether indeed the countries that I had identified as being the countries that had potential were those ones. And each time I had new feedback from my team, I had to listen to that. Well, maybe some financiers were telling me, I want this reporting, I want this mandate. So you have to also hold your line to make sure that at the end of the journey, you're building something that still makes sense, right? Because if I say yes, yes, yes to everyone, then I ended up with, you know, a reporting guidelines and investment strategy that is pulled in so many directions that is not gonna work. So I think that's one. First, it's not, you know, policy building or anything. It's just dialogue, creating platforms such as this one where people, you know, like-minded would talk to each other and just say, this I know and this I don't know. So tell me about it, right? It's a return a greedy thing. Well, for us, it's a small, high single-digit return. It's not greedy, but it's trying to say something. But for a lot of people, it was, are you saying that you're trying to privatize the drinking water space? We're saying no. Right. We're saying that we're trying to build and bring public and private people together at the table. And as you said, Ambassador René, I think we're trying to show that if you value something, you need to give it a certain price. It doesn't mean that it becomes up for the capitalist private sector to grab it. It doesn't mean that, but at least you value it. You show that then through that value, it needs to be looked at in a very different lens.
No, thank you so much, Dina. I think, you know, the first loss conversation is one that we are also trying to socialize, right? Because that really is a role of the Joint SDG Fund, to be that catalytic investor that allows others to see that these generous public monies from governments like the Netherlands and others in the fund can really be, you know, the change agent, can be the beginning of a conversation that can go much, much further. I think, you know, it's interesting. We heard the ambassador ask that, you know, in all the climate change conversations that we hope to hear in the spring meetings, at UNGA in September, at COP in Abu Dhabi, we hope also we can have a footnote that says through blended finance, right? That we hope that we continue to socialize these kinds of mechanisms, because we recognize that official development assistance, given all the pressures, are not going to be able to meet that need. And it is more and more reliant on this myriad of stakeholders to make the change. So thank you so much, Dina. I also know we'll be coming back to you, I'm sure, for more questions. I just want to do a quick shout out to Mr. Winston Shaw from the Rural Agricultural Development Authority of Jamaica, just to make sure he's not registered under another name or under another phone number. We don't see you in our speaker room. We might have blocked you out inadvertently. So if you are there, please message us through the chat, and we'll make sure that we pass you the floor. So we'll loop back to you, Winston, when we're able to connect with you. In the interim, I'm going to skip ahead to an old friend, our UNICEF representative in Rwanda, Juliana Lindsay. Juliana, you're most welcome. So now we're going from the example of Cambodia now to another fascinating country with great opportunities, Rwanda. And Juliana, I see that according to an IMF costing of the SDGs report of only 2019, so just a few years ago, Rwanda estimated an additional 18.7 percentage points of GDP in spending was needed to close development gaps in only 4 sectors, and that was education, infrastructure, health, and water and sanitation. And as part of an integrated national financing framework development process, the joint program in Rwanda that was financed by the Joint SDG Fund devised a sustainable WASH financing strategy. So very relevant to what we've just been discussing. So we would love to hear more from you, Juliana, about the main elements of the strategy and what have been some of the actions and policies identified so far. Over to you.
Sure, thank you, Lisa, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Indeed, we were able to use some of the SDG joint program funds to work on the water financing strategy. I'll walk you through some of the things that the strategy covers. We've looked at first just reviewing the sector performance, what's been achieved, what are the gaps in terms of achievement. We then looked at costing the remaining gaps, and we then looked at figuring out what it would take, whether through external or internal financing, to try to close that gap so that all of the water and sanitation needs of the country could be met. The strategy looked at some financial bottlenecks. It looked at recommendations to closing and addressing these bottlenecks. It found that at the moment, the Rwandan government spending about 80 million US dollars a year on water infrastructure. That actually needs to be about 250 million a year at least. But we were able to identify a number of actions and policies that can be used to try to close this gap. And I'll mention just two for starters. One is about spending existing money more effectively. And the second is about, of course, getting additional money. When we look at spending money more effectively, in Rwanda, we find that a large percentage, something around 40% of the water that's generated actually doesn't reach the consumer. It's lost along the way because of leaky pipes, et cetera. So there's an immediate 40% gain that could be gotten in terms of the water that is available, simply by having better maintenance. There are other methods as well, but I think that's one quite nice example of, instead of just getting more money for more water, we can have more effective and efficient ways of using the water that we have to begin with. But then obviously we do need additional resources as well. And that's where the team looked at increasing the government budget, increasing development partner allocations for water and sanitation, which is pretty low in Rwanda. And also, of course, climate financing. UNICEF is in the process of working with the Ministry of Infrastructure and others in the government to put in an application for the government to the Green Climate Fund to look at financing for solar powered water facilities, water systems, for more climate resilient water systems so that they're less likely to be washed away by a flood, et cetera. So the water financing strategy overall, I think, has been very helpful to the Ministry of Infrastructure, to the Water Resources Board, to WASAC, which is the Water Provision Board in Rwanda, all of these different government entities. And of course, we developed the financing strategy very closely together with them, not just on our own.
Excellent, Juliana. You know, you've given us such an overview of the details, and I love also the data point about 40% of water being lost, you know, through the pipes alone. Could you tell us a little bit about any lessons learned from the process, either by, you know, government, consumers, service providers, development partners? You know, when you're developing a strategy, you often have to look at where you've come in order to see where you'd like to go. So because, you know, we're trying to sort of, you know, embrace this wider concept as we open the water conference of the next 3 days. Anything unique or to you notable from Rwanda that you think could help influence the global conversation happening this week here? Thanks.
There are 4 things that we take away as the team has reflected on the process of putting together this financing strategy. The first I actually just mentioned, which is doing it very closely with the government itself. We worked on the water financing strategy very much with the Ministry of Infrastructure, also with the Ministry of Finance. That's an important piece as well. The second is bringing in other stakeholders. We discussed this and got input from NGOs, civil society, the private sector, water drilling companies, for example. The third is making sure that you get the right expertise to develop the strategy. We were lucky to partner with an international organization that has quite a lot of experience doing these strategies, and they brought expertise, they brought experience. So we ended up with quite a high quality document. And then finally, of course, is the dissemination and making sure that it's used. So that's the stage that we are at the moment, making sure that the findings are shared widely, and then working with government to figure out how to use the findings of the strategy. And in many cases, you can't implement every single finding immediately. So it's a matter of them prioritizing with the government. What do they want to do first? What do they want to do in 3 years? What do they want to do a little bit further down the road?
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you, Juliana. I think we very, very helpful, and we're already seeing some questions coming in from our colleagues who are listening in. I feel that we are struggling to find our colleague, Mr. Winston Shaw. So again, Winston, if you are there, we would be delighted to hear from you. There's been some exciting developments done by the Rural Agricultural Development Authority of Jamaica, specifically since the shocks due to the war in Ukraine have affected their food, energy, water, and farming systems. And that's mainly due to the cost of increased cost of fertilizer and seed scarcity, et cetera. So we will continue to look out for him to hear a little bit more about the role of government and this Agricultural Development Authority. And it kind of points to rural farming. led by women. So that's another interesting aspect that we wanted this panel to bring in, is that, you know, as much as access to water is such an issue, back to the ambassador's points around the industries that are part of it, you know, there's employment and job creation and livelihoods also wrapped up in the water sector. So many elements to this conversation. Dina, I think I'll start with you with one of the questions from the listeners, if you will. And this is a congratulations from Lauren on launching the Water Acceleration Fund. And she's interested in hearing more specifics about the different returns the various investors have agreed to and the time frame. So interesting if you could maybe share, I think you've outlined a little bit about the different types of stakeholders, from development banks to first loss investors, foundations. But if you could, and she's also wondering if the fund has geographic priorities. So those are two maybe questions to start off to you, Dina. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much, first of all, for that, the good wishes. All right, so the Water Access Acceleration Fund has two classes of shares, as I mentioned. You have investors who said, I can take the first loss bit, whereas other ones are saying, I'm more a mainstream investor, or my money is coming from a mainstream vehicle, and therefore I would like to be a little bit more protected. So in this regard, the structure of the fund it has different seniority from a risk perspective, but the return is actually, if things go well, the return is actually the same for all investors. So in this case, the first loss investor take the risk of, if everything goes wrong, we will use their first loss money to absorb the losses and hope that it will still protect the capital of the other mainstream investors. If things go well, and if we manage to reach, you know, to preserve the capital and make a little return, then we'll split it equally among them. I think that's an important feature. Second, as I said, the return is single digits. It has been very cautiously designed and thought through. We've looked at many different types of drinking water businesses in emerging markets. When they, everybody knows that better than me. When you are talking about clients who are low income, you're talking about the need to be extremely efficient to reach scale, to offer them an affordable liter of water that is suited to their purchasing power. So by essence, you know, it's going to make a lot of money. So I think, you know, the fund wants to recognize that. It's a fund that wants to promote investment readiness, but it's still, you know, recognizing the fact that these are businesses with still thin margins. So that's the second element to keep in mind. The third thing is, you know, we talk about return. The fund has a financial return target, but it has an impact target as well, embedded into what we call in the jargon, the waterfall. That basically what it means is, you know, us, and I think it's an interesting feature of the blended finance that I like to highlight, is that, you know, typically in the equity world, the asset manager is incentivized on the financial return, right? So if you overhit your financial return that you promised to your investors, you, the asset manager, take that extra return and you're allowed to split it, you know, part for you, a part for your investor. This concept remains. But in addition, we have an impact return target as well. And that means that we, the asset manager, are incentivized to put the same focus on finding companies that are offering products to low-income population. We have a definition of what's low-income. Affordable, we have a ratio, and what does that mean to be an affordable liter of water? Climate resilient, we have also definitions on what are the type of non-revenue water and other indicators we want to track. So all this is embedded into the way that we're going to be rewarded. On the geographies, Lisa, as I said, it's a global fund. Having said that, one key conclusion that we draw from global equity expertise is, yes, you need to diversify, but you also need to ensure focus. And so therefore, for us, you know, once you've gone through a full investigation of many countries, I think the way we look at it is, again, we're saying it's a new sector, it's a new fund. So where is it that Incofin has had some exposure, some expertise, right? Where is it that we have offices, or that we have links with certain countries? That's one. Second, we look at what is the regulatory framework in that country, and how conducive is it to private-public initiatives, such as the Water Access Acceleration Fund, that give us comfort that if we channel money there, overall, it will be operating into a business-friendly ecosystem. It doesn't mean to be perfect, right? We're not saying, but at least that there is certain features where you feel, there's not going to be a risk of expropriation, that you can repatriate the funds, that the regulators on the water side are overall been making their regulations evolve towards recognizing that complementarity between public and private. So that's another criteria we use. And from that analysis, we are now, seeing some promising perspective in Latin America that would go from Mexico to Colombia. In Africa, that would go from Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Rwanda. These are the countries that we're currently looking at. And in Asia, we're looking at India, Indonesia, Cambodia, as some of the countries, and Philippines, which seem to be operating under the few guidelines I just mentioned.
Dina, thank you so much. I think on your latter point, that to me points to an interesting role for the United Nations, because investors have to be aware of the environment, policy, legislative, tax, there's all kinds of considerations you have to look at before you're going into a country. And I think as we learn from the successes of your global water funding mechanisms, we can also take away what does the Philippines or what does Rwanda or Kenya have that perhaps Uganda, Tanzania, or another country may need, so that we can start to really raise the water level, if you will, on the policy and the framework that can be enabling for future investments. I think that's an exciting space that many of us inside the UN have to understand well enough. So I think there's a lot of also education needed for what are the levers, that we can pull and push to make a difference. Fascinating. We have an interesting question, Ambassador, that I think is probably best for you, in the sense that you are our government, you are our sole government representative on the panel. And it's really talking about the percentage of financing being provided in terms of the various budgets that governments might manage, right? So from finance to infrastructure, it's an interesting view. I mean, have you, as you're preparing for this water conference, I know as you're looking probably at the outcomes expected at the end of the week, have you tried to grapple with how to open up new sources of financing from governments and how to identify them?
Yeah, we have definitely done so, and one of the things that I also said is that we're trying to first and foremost, what we have seen in WASH is that we've seen some very exciting developments. And so as Dina explained, what she does with Incofin, and also, for example, what we do with Aqua for All. These are all examples where it's very easy to leverage a relatively modest amount of public funding into a fund and get much better results. So this whole idea of accelerating and using blended finance and mainstreaming that, and also getting the understanding that should be better, is definitely something that is on the top of my mind. Also, if I look at funds like the JEF or the GCF, there's still a lot of projectism, and there's also a lot of intermediatism. And I also think for those funds, it's interesting, also in the context of WASH and broader water goals, to look at how we can really leverage our money. And as you said, that is an important conversation that we will have no matter what. So it's basically using public funding, spending more wisely, and trying to use it as a leverage. That is basically what one of the main messages that we have. Yes.
Right. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I think certainly the Joint SDG Fund really has large ambitions in this area, right? To allow us to promise you, Ambassador, that for every euro that the Netherlands puts into the fund, we turn it into 3, 4, or 5. And that's in addition to the impact, you know, to Dina's point, right? There's that financial return, but then there's that impact return. Thank you for that. Interesting question about from Rwanda, or regarding a visitor to Rwanda, Juliana, in this concept of ubuntu, and forgive me if I've mispronounced, please correct me, this idea of a share a common humanity. And how can a whole society approach, Juliana, linking all the sectors from youth to the aging, children, women, address water scarcity? What a great question for UNICEF and for you. Over to you.
It is. It's a great question. And there are a couple of ideas that I'll share. One is that here in Rwanda, we've been working with government and partners to strengthen district water and sanitation and hygiene boards, as well as community participation and management of water resources and operation, teaching community members how to maintain the water systems, for example. But even beyond that, it's interesting. I was just at a meeting this morning with the Ministry of Finance in Rwanda, and one of the topics was civic participation. And at the end of the day, we want and we hope that in democratic societies, as Rwanda is, that when citizens demand a service, the government will respond with that service. And it reminds me, years ago, I will never forget, in Ghana, in West Africa, driving down the road in a rural area towards the Atlantic coast, and there was a little sign. This was a few months before an election. And there was a little sign that said, "No electricity, no vote." Meaning, you don't give us power, we're not going to vote for you. And I see that potential power of citizens regarding water services and sanitation services as well. No water, no vote.
Fantastic. No, I think, you know, this empowerment and this idea of what people really can advocate for, can educate each other about, and see the immediate impact is really something that that all democracies really seek, right? That real making it as impactful at the home level as it might be at capital. So great perspective there. Interesting question here also about monitoring the impact return and who are the outcome guarantors. So maybe Joe, that's an interesting one maybe to take to you first. Okay, panic, no. So it says, you know, how will these different funds audit the impact? Will they partner with other agencies? Will there be an outcome guarantor built into the fund? I mean, I can open that also up to Dina or Juliana as well. But I think, you know, one of the things I'm always trying to promote when I speak to asset managers, institutional investors, is that the UN does have boots on the ground. And we do have tremendous power through these community groups that are our partners, that essentially are the last mile of delivery on so many of our health, nutrition, immunization, water and sanitation programs. But I'd love to hear how we're tapping into that, maybe in Cambodia or in Rwanda. So I don't know, the floor is open, Joe or Dina or Juliana.
Let me have a first crack, but then I'm very gladly going to hand over in particular to Dina, who of course can look at this from the investor side. But let me start by saying a couple of things. You know, in Cambodia, we're extremely excited about doing this because we think it's the right solution that will enable us to go to scale. And I would just underline what the previous speakers have said about its absolute necessity to bring the private sector and the public sector together on this. And Dina's point about speaking different languages is so true. There's great learning happening on my side and the team side to understand this, and I'm sure from the other side as well. But when we come together, I truly believe that magic can happen. And of course, it has to be the right context. But I believe Cambodia is at the cusp of being able to land these kinds of investment. And with that comes the role of the UN to not just help create the environment because we have boots on the ground, we've had them for years on the ground. You might probably be, you know, no disrespect to anybody else in the sector, but it would be hard pressed to find someone besides UNICEF in terms of international partners that understands the water sector as well as they do. And that helps us before looking at these vehicles by creating the policy environment. Cambodia has passed a new water law. You know, we supported all of that. So to create the conditions to actually for these businesses to hopefully install themselves and flourish. And then on the other side, to help on the monitoring side independently, because we want these SDG outcomes. We want to get into those areas eventually where the furthest left behind are. And these mechanisms of first loss that Dina mentioned to enable us to do so, etc., are of course key. There are financial performance indicators built in. There are performance-based payments in these blended instruments. Dina can certainly, I think, or others speak about these more. But obviously, unless you can, from a financial perspective, as well as from the impact perspective, have independent evaluations, then the whole thing is obviously not going to fly. So let me just stop there. I hope
That's great, Joe. Yeah.
Everybody, thank you.
Thank you so much. Dina, would you like to add anything a little bit about, I mean, from the investment view, I mean, obviously, when you are providing those single digit returns, you also have to make sure that the impact has been made. And how do you grapple with that, especially when you're managing a global fund? So now you have activities possibly in, you know, 8, 9, 10 or more different jurisdictions, different challenges, different languages, different cultures. It's complex. So please, we'd love to hear some of that tradecraft.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is go, you know, for us, we want to go for significant investments. So if I reach 70 million euro of total size, I want to try to make 10, 12 investments just to make sure that I'm going to be this co-pilot with each of these future water businesses. I'm not going to be just, you know, one founder who comes, invest, and we want to be together shaping the strategy, understanding their struggles, their growth plan, helping them with capacity building. So I think it's one key thing to make sure that you build a partnership. Actually, you're not just, you know, spreading the money. I think that's one thing to take into account. And when you do that, and if you've done a good job at designing an investment strategy that at its core has both an ambition of financial sustainability, but also impact, then everything you will do will flow towards this, you know, dual goals. If you talk to an investment manager at Ecofin, that person knows how to do a financial valuation of a company, but they know how to track ENS questions, ENS data points, and to have an impact conversation on what is this water business intention? Why do they want to target low-income population? How do they measure the low-income population? What is affordable? What is a non-revenue water? What is a gender ambition? So people don't have to be expert in everything, but at least they need to have a certain base of expertise to be able to hold those conversations day one and to show to the potential company that we want to invest in. But this is our DNA. We're not a mainstream equity fund that is just going to invest money and aim for return in 5-6 years. We are aiming to prove, again, financial sustainability of the sector, but we are here to do it with a core and very ambitious impact mandate. So I think that's a little bit how we approach it. The second thing I would say is, yes, indeed, in order to prove and reassure your investor that this is indeed the financial return you're making, then you need to get your books audited by external auditors, right? So then they're reassured that the figures make sense. For the impact incentive I mentioned, yes, we will have an external party audit a number of these impact indicators to make sure that once and if we claim that we have overreached our impact, our investors feel reassured that this is not just our claim, but that this is, and I think it's important to also promote, support external ESG and impact auditors and raters, because they play a very important role of building a consolidated industry level data and transparency and allow us to build benchmarks, which I think is something that's very, very needed in our impact investment industry.
Mhm.
So that's also something to take into account. My final point would be, you're right. I think, when we designed this fund, we thought, okay, we have a global impact investment expertise, but we don't have a water expertise, right? And so we need to be humble about this, and therefore we need to acquire the expertise and surround ourselves with people who have a much deeper and longer expertise. And one very interesting feature in the Water Access Accelerations Fund governance is that in addition to a typical investment committee, which is the one that makes the investment decisions, we have created what we call a technical expert committee. And in this committee, we have people who have national policy and regulatory policies on the water space background. We have people who are engineers, we have people who are more development specialists coming from backgrounds in nonprofit. And I think we recognize, that their recommendation is key for then the file to be put to the investment committee. And I think, the role that the UN is playing in having all this knowledge is very much, aligned with this technical expertise committee I was talking about, is to recognize that, yes, maybe the pure finance conversation has not been the core expertise of the UN, but the nexus of topics where this water, has been seen from a climate angle, a youth angle, a local economic development angle. And so now if we put a water business and let them drill a hole, what's the implication, right? And I think gathering and respecting and using this expertise and that voice is very important.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dina. Juliana, UNICEF also brings decades of expertise in the WASH sector. Any quick reflections also on how there's a role for UNICEF or the UN, to Dina's point, sort of on this kind of technical advisory committee to make sure that we really are reaching those most vulnerable in so many countries in the world?
Well, as you know, one of our key roles is working with governments to help make sure that they are reaching the most vulnerable. And one of the things that we've done in Rwanda is help the Ministry of Infrastructure and other parts of the government set up a management information system for water services, so that the government has a good overview of how many water services, whether it's both boreholes or other types of water systems, how many are there, are they working, are they not working, are they under repair, what are the fees that are being charged, et cetera. And that helps governments to have a useful overview.
Fantastic, fantastic. We just have one more question, Juliana, that just came in. A listener, Jean-Marie from Rwanda, should the focus on rural areas rather than urban centers, should there be a focus because some don't have clean water due to less technology or only consuming water from the mountains, valleys, and marshlands? So maybe if you could say a few words about that balance between rural and urban centers in Rwanda.
He's absolutely right. The access to water is certainly lower in rural areas than it is in urban areas. Interestingly, however, sanitation is in some cases not so great in urban areas and a bit better in rural areas, in part because in urban areas you have people living very closely together and they're more likely to be sharing a latrine, whereas in rural areas a household is more likely to have its own access to a latrine. But he's 100% right that we do need to focus on rural areas and ultimately on the whole country to be sure that there's 100% access.
Excellent, excellent. So colleagues, before maybe I go around to each of you for a 1-minute closing remark, I just want to respond to a question about how can colleagues in Africa tuning in today, how can they have access to the Joint SDG Fund? So colleagues, I'm remiss for not maybe giving a 1 minute on the fund. The fund was created by the United Nations General Assembly as a vehicle for the reform of the UN development system, which in essence is to make us a more efficient and effective global system for the Sustainable Development Goals. And our impact is through, and first and foremost, through resident coordinators. So through the representative of Secretary General Gutierrez at country level, so like a Joseph Schur in Cambodia. And then it's the strength of the UN country team, evidenced by Juliana in Rwanda, an agency like UNICEF, among many, many others. that actually make the programs and the jointness successful. So we do luckily have our largest allocations globally in Africa across the continent. It's $86 million to date, and that's across our various portfolios. And my advice would be to reach out to your UN resident coordinator office or to one of your UN agencies. They typically have their main offices in capital, and they may have provincial or district offices elsewhere in the country. And to really join into the task force of your sector. If it's on water, there's bound to be a water and sanitation task force, working group, community of practice, and learn more about the sector and how you might be an implementer, a stakeholder, or a partner. We work with many civil society organizations every day through the agencies, funds, and programs of the UN Development System. So we would welcome your engagement with us, welcome your support. And efforts like today are really to socialize and advocate not only for the amazing work that's happening in countries like Cambodia and Rwanda and Jamaica, but also to how partnerships like the Joint SDG Fund with the government of the Netherlands are really trying to catalyze more momentum. So I'm keeping an eye on the time. So I'd love to just give each of our esteemed panelists maybe a moment or two just to reflect. If you've come away with anything new, if we missed something, please tell us what we've missed, or maybe give us homework for what to do in the coming days as we go into the rest of the water conference. So Ambassador, if I may, I'll start with you, and then I'll pass to Joe, Dina, and Juliana. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Yeah, yes, Lisa, thank you. We've always been a cheerleader of this SDG fund because we also see that it could really sort of enforce and strengthen the resident coordinator system. We're really also in favor of a reinvigorated resident coordinator system. And our funding is unearmarked. And what we would feel, I mean, the fund should really be a catalyst for change within the system. And sometimes, of course, we also look at it like, aren't you pooled in ways that you start competing with thematic fundings? But I also really think that it would be, I think, donors like the Netherlands, we could actually do more to bring this across, because the initial ambition with the SDG fund was much higher, also in terms of funding. So I really think that we should really try to get back on track with the SDG fund, because it's part of this necessary reform that most donors seem to seek and say that they are seeking within the UN. So I think unearmarked funding of these funds is also important to really let you respect the knowledge and the competence and the expertise that you try to build up within a fund like that, and that you're not pulled apart by all kinds of token projects and wishes of donors. So still a big cheerleader.
Ambassador, you are my new best friend, and we must continue this conversation. You're essentially encapsulating the funding compact, which member states signed on to as this reform was launched, which was really to allow the expertise at country level, so evidenced here by Joe and Dina working together with Catalytic Money, with Juliana working with the other agencies, funds, and programs in Kigali and beyond. This is the kind of opportunity that allows them to run with Catalytic Money and not be sort of driven by a very narrow priority. So we couldn't agree more, and the ambition remains. We are determined. We were given a 300 million a year target by the General Assembly, and we will reach that target if I have any breath left. So thank you for reminding us to stay focused on the results, to stay focused on those who won't have the privilege to join a webinar like this in the near future. That's who we're here for today. So on that positive note, Joe, over to you.
Thank you. Look, what can I add? Let me say this. In a previous professional position, I was very much in the energy space and looking at policy and financial de-risking for energy investments. Even though, I should say it again, I'm a development climate person. I'm not a financial wizard. But it's been quite frankly, painful, see the UN system moving step by step in this world where we build these partnerships. And I think that the message for our panel is what you and the ambassadors exchanged. Please get the word out more for instruments like the SDG funds that equips country teams. And it's not about the RC or the RCO. It's about equipping the country team to come together, to create incentives that bring our technical expertise together, our know-how on the policy space and others, and that provide the first initial catalytic investment with which we can go to other partners and say, hey, we have something to offer, come join us. I think if we do more of that, we can overall actually reach our targets much faster. It's complicated work for us, as Dina said again. You know, we don't always speak that language. There's some resistance, some hesitance built into our different organizations and so on. But we are completely 100% on the right track doing this. And so let's get the word out to do more than along the lines of what the SDG fund is already doing. I think it's going to be a win-win-win-win-win-win-win, you know, for all those that are going to be engaged in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. It is the power of many, right? It is joining hands. It is bringing the expertise that is unique to each of us and admitting that we can't be all of the roles, right? I think that was another great point that Dina brought out today. So Dina, over to you for any final reflection or remark.
Yeah, I would say in this in this concept of joining forces, there is a need to let go. And we all need to be aware of this, that if you don't do direct funding, then you lose a little bit of that direct ownership and claim. But this is for the greater good. So I think it's important that everybody, you know, works with this idea and understand what is it that you still want to be involved in, but what is it where you feel like my action is going to be so much more effective and powerful if I invest in a fund, for instance, rather than try to do it on my own. But yes, then you need to go explain that you will not going to be able to earmark your specific money to, you're going to be part of many stakeholders groups. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is, since I've been in this water sector conversation, what I've noticed is everybody talks about what we should be doing, what we should be doing. One conclusion I drew from my 15 years of work in the financial inclusion space is that we spent a lot of time saying we should be doing. Then at some point we had crisis or we were stagnated. And then we realized that what we needed to do is to talk about what went wrong, the failures, the crisis, the lessons learned. And for me, and so it's a very big piece, is human being learn through realizing when they fail, when they did a mistake. How can we all, maybe cannot be public forum all the time because people are afraid of, you know, but how can we have those meaningful knowledge sharing conversation where we don't replicate the same mistakes on one hand? And second, how can we, and I think that's where the United Nations can play a good role, how can we identify the role models? Which one is this public utility that is making a huge improvement in maintenance, tariff conversation, and non-revenue water decrease? Let's put them on the spotlight and make them shine. What is this new national policy or regulation that a specific government has put a lot of effort building that is not conducive to private sector? Let's highlight their journey when they went, and slowly you build, you know, role models in addition to what went wrong. And that's, I mean, for me, how you shape, you know, the future, and you know what should the do's and the don'ts. And that's, you know, something that, yeah, I'd like to suggest for us for the future. Thank you.
No, I love it. I think, you know, we really, obviously, it is complicated and it's not easy to do. And we are trying to bring people who are brand new to this conversation or are used to having a very different role. So I think being open to what we know, what we don't know, and who will lead. There'll be new leaders in this space as we go forward. It won't be the traditional ones that perhaps we knew 20 years ago, and that's okay, right? Because that's progress. And I hope that I hope we can all stay on that page together. Juliana, over to you for some reflections.
Thank you. I'll be brief because I know we're already over time. I just want to point out the multi-sectoral aspect of water and sanitation particularly. An interesting example is that we had a partnership with the Dutch government, coincidentally, here in Rwanda on nutrition. But clean water is a major component of reducing malnutrition. And so it was really nice to bring those two pieces together. There are lots of other examples, but I just want to close by emphasizing that multi-sectoral aspect of water and sanitation.
Fantastic. No, again, another example of how the SDGs are also, you know, they all intersect, and how clean water will have so many spillover, pardon the pun, spillover effects. Colleagues, we are out of time. We so want to thank our panelists, Ambassador Van Hel, Dina, Joseph, Juliana. You've really brought so much perspective, and we could easily almost each get a PhD from each of you in terms of your expertise. So thank you for giving us your time. We want to continue this conversation. We want to make sure that the Cambodia and the Rwandan projects are fully financed. So Ambassador will probably be coming to The Hague for a breakfast with some other partners, looking for ways to really, you know, challenge the status quo. I hope the water conference in the coming days does the same. And we thank all of the team, Joint SDG Fund team. I'd love for you to put on your cameras briefly. There is a dream team that makes events like this happen. And I just want to make sure that Vivalda, Victoria, Elaine, Edja, there's so many, maybe they're camera shy, but anyway, so many colleagues behind the scenes that have also made this happen for the fund, as there are across the UN development system in Rwanda, Cambodia, and beyond. So thank you to all of our participants as well. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the great questions. Keep us honest. Keep sending in those questions. Keep reminding us to do more so that the UN can be what it was intended to be. Thank you again so much, and everyone stay well and take care.